The crack of a pistol shot tore through the morning stillness, causing Katherine Anderson's heart to leap into her throat as she clutched her 8-year-old daughter Emma close to her side. It wasn't an uncommon sound in Thornridge, Colorado, in 1878, but Katherine never grew accustomed to it, especially not since Thomas had been taken by a stray bullet during a saloon dispute 16 months ago. "Inside, Emma." "Now," Katherine commanded, her voice soft but firm as she ushered her daughter through the doorway of their modest home at the edge of town. "But Mama, I was just going to pick flowers for Papa's later, sweetheart," Katherine interrupted, closing the door behind them with a gentle click. Through the window, she watched as Sheriff Dawson marched a disheveled man down the dusty Main Street toward the jailhouse. The man's hands were bound, but his head was held high, dark eyes scanning the faces of onlookers with defiance. Thornridge had earned itself a reputation as one of the toughest settlements in the territory. Men drank hard, fought harder, and sometimes died over nothing more than a perceived slight. It was no place for a child, the townspeople often remarked when they thought Katherine couldn't hear. No place for a widow raising a daughter alone. Katherine's fingers absently twisted her wedding band as she watched Emma retreat to the corner where her dolls were arranged in a neat row. Her daughter's golden hair hung in tangled disarray down her back. Katherine had tried to braid it that morning, but her own fingers, stiff from washing linens for the hotel, had failed her once again. "I have to deliver Mrs. Holloway's mending," Katherine said, gathering the neatly folded garments. "You stay inside with the door locked, understand?" Emma nodded solemnly, her eyes Thomas's eyes serious beyond her years. Outside, the October sun beat down with unexpected warmth as Katherine made her way toward the center of town. The boardwalk creaked beneath her worn boots, and she nodded politely to those she passed, ignoring the whispers that followed in her wake. Poor Anderson woman. Shame about her husband. No way to raise a child. The words were familiar, unwelcome companions on her daily journeys through Thornridge. Katherine lifted her chin higher, clutching the bundle of mending tighter against her chest. She would survive. They would survive. She was so focused on maintaining her dignity that she nearly collided with a tall figure rounding the corner by the general store. "Pardon me, madam," came a deep voice as strong hands steadied her shoulders, preventing the collision. Katherine looked up into a face she didn't recognize, unusual in a town Thornridge's size. The man was tall, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the summer sky. He wasn't clean-shaven like the businessmen in town, but neither did he sport the wild, unkempt beard of many passing cowboys. His neatly trimmed mustache and the quiet dignity in his stance marked him as something different altogether. "My fault entirely," she replied, stepping back from his touch. The stranger tipped his hat, a plain brown Stetson, dusty from the trail but well-shaped. "Name's Yates McKinnon. Just rode in." "Katherine Anderson," she offered with polite reserve, then added, "Welcome to Thornridge, Mr. McKinnon." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Call me Yates, please, and thank you for the welcome, though I gather not everyone shares your sentiment." He nodded toward the saloon, where several men stood watching with undisguised suspicion. "Thornridge takes time to warm to strangers," Katherine explained, suddenly aware of how tightly she was gripping her bundle. "If you'll excuse me." "Of course." He stepped aside, but his voice followed her. "Hope to see you again, Mrs. Anderson." Katherine didn't look back, but she felt his gaze on her until she reached Mrs. Holloway's front door. Later that evening, as she brushed Emma's hair before bed, her daughter's voice broke the companionable silence. "Mama, why can't I go to school with the other children?" Katherine's hand stilled. The town's small schoolhouse had reopened 2 months prior after being closed for repairs. She had kept Emma home, telling herself it was temporary. "The schoolhouse is quite far, sweetheart. Billy Pearson says it's because you're scared I'll turn wild like the men in the saloon." Katherine set down the brush. "Billy Pearson should mind his own business," she said, turning Emma to face her. "I just want to keep you safe." "But I'm lonely, Mama," Emma whispered, and Katherine felt her heart crack just a little more. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Katherine sat by the window, staring at the distant lights of town. Thomas had wanted more for their daughter than this half-life on the fringes of a harsh town. He had spoken of moving east, perhaps to Denver, where Emma could attend a proper school and Katherine could use her skills as a seamstress in a real shop, dreams that had died with him in the dirt of Thornridge's Main Street. The following morning, Katherine was hanging laundry when she noticed a commotion near the livery stable. A crowd had gathered, and at its center, she caught glimpses of a tall figure working with a horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that was rearing and fighting the ropes that held it. "Mama, look," Emma called from the doorway, pointing excitedly. "Can we go see?" Katherine hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close to me." As they approached, the crowd parted slightly and Katherine recognized Yates McKinnon. His coat was off, sleeves rolled to the elbows as he spoke in low, soothing tones to the agitated horse. The animal's eyes rolled white with fear, but Yates never raised his voice or made a sudden movement. "That horse killed Jim Carlson last spring," Mrs. Baker whispered beside Katherine. "No one's been able to get near it since. They were going to shoot it today." Katherine watched as Yates continued his patient work, gradually moving closer to the trembling animal. His movements were deliberate but gentle, his voice a constant, calming presence. "He's not afraid," Emma said, her voice filled with wonder. "No, he's not," Katherine agreed, finding herself equally captivated by the man's quiet confidence. It took nearly an hour, but the crowd remained transfixed as Yates eventually placed his hand on the horse's muzzle. The animal trembled but didn't pull away. When Yates finally turned to the livery owner with a nod, the crowd erupted in applause. "Told you I could help him," Yates said, his voice carrying to where Katherine stood. "He's not mean, just frightened and confused. Needs patience, not punishment." As the crowd dispersed, Yates spotted Katherine and Emma. He wiped his hands on a rag and approached them with an easy smile. "Mrs. Anderson, good morning." "That was remarkable, Mr. McKinnon," Katherine said, genuinely impressed. "Just understanding," he replied, then crouched down to Emma's level. "And who might this young lady be?" "I'm Emma," her daughter announced, stepping forward with unexpected boldness. "That horse was really scared." "He was," Yates agreed solemnly. "But sometimes the things that scare us the most just need a little kindness to show their true nature." "Are you staying in Thornridge?" Katherine found herself asking. Yates straightened, his eyes meeting hers. "For a while. I've taken a position with Mr. Harrison training horses for his new breeding program." "The Harrison Ranch is just past our house," Emma said excitedly. "You'll ride past us." "Emma," Katherine chided gently, but Yates just laughed. "Then I'll be sure to tip my hat when I pass by," he promised, and Emma beamed. Over the next 2 weeks, Yates became a familiar sight in Thornridge. Katherine observed how he moved through town respectful, but unintimidated by the rough elements that gathered at the saloon each evening. Unlike many new arrivals, he didn't feel the need to prove himself with bravado or gunplay. He simply went about his business with quiet competence. On Sundays after church, Katherine often found him engaged in conversation with Reverend Phillips, discussing books or news from the eastern cities. She learned that Yates had fought for the Union in the war, then worked cattle drives in Texas before heading north to Colorado. He was educated more so than most men who passed through, and seemed to have an endless supply of stories that captivated Emma when their paths crossed. One afternoon, as Katherine was returning from delivering mending to Judge Parker's wife, she spotted Yates sitting on a bench outside the general store. Beside him sat Emma, her face animated as she talked. Before Katherine could hurry forward, something stopped her. The sight of Yates's hands moving expertly through Emma's golden hair, weaving a perfect braid. "My sister taught me," she heard him explain as she approached. "She had hair just like yours, and our ma died when we were young. Had to learn to help her get ready for school." "There you are, Emma," Katherine said, trying to mask her surprise. "I thought you were helping Mrs. Miller shell peas." "I finished early, Mama, and look what Mr. McKinnon did." Emma turned her head proudly, showing off the neat braid that hung down her back. "It's beautiful," Katherine acknowledged, meeting Yates's eyes. "Thank you." "My pleasure, madam," he replied, standing. "Emma's been telling me about her interest in horses. She's got a good mind for it." "She's always loved animals," Katherine said, suddenly aware of several townspeople watching their interaction with undisguised interest. Yates noticed too. He tipped his hat and stepped back. "I should get back to the Harrison place. Good day, Mrs. Anderson, Miss Emma." As they walked home, Emma couldn't stop talking about Yates and his stories of wild mustangs and the proper way to approach a nervous horse. Katherine listened with a mixture of pleasure at her daughter's enthusiasm and concern at her obvious attachment to the cowboy. "He said I could come see the foals at the Harrison Ranch sometime," Emma concluded hopefully. "Could we, Mama? We'll see," Katherine replied, non-committal. "Mr. McKinnon is very busy with his work." "But he likes us," Emma insisted. "I can tell." That evening, as Katherine prepared their simple supper, she found herself thinking about Yates's hands strong enough to control a wild horse, yet gentle enough to braid a little girl's hair without tangling or pulling. Thomas had been gentle too, she remembered with a pang. Not like the other men in Thornridge, who seemed to believe that tenderness was a weakness. The next day brought unexpected drama to the quiet town. Katherine was in the general store when she heard raised voices outside. Moving to the window, she saw Sheriff Dawson confronting three rough-looking men on horseback. "We don't want trouble here, Reeves," the sheriff was saying, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "No trouble, Sheriff," replied the largest of the three, a man with a scarred face and cold eyes. "Just looking for an old friend, tall fella named McKinnon. Heard he's working hereabouts." Katherine felt a chill. Something in the man's tone suggested friend was far from the truth. "Don't know anyone by that name," Dawson lied smoothly, and Katherine was surprised by the sheriff's protection of the newcomer. "Funny. Heard different in Silver Creek," Reeves replied, scanning the gathered faces until his gaze landed on Katherine in the store window. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. "Maybe I'll just wait around until he shows up." The three men dismounted and headed for the saloon, their spurs jangling ominously on the wooden boardwalk. "Mrs. Anderson," Sheriff Dawson called, approaching the store, "might be best if you head home directly. And if you happen to see McKinnon on your way, tell him he's got visitors." "Who are they?" Katherine asked quietly as she stepped outside. "Trouble," Dawson replied grimly. Reeves was locked up with McKinnon in Wyoming Territory some years back for different reasons. McKinnon was clearing his name of false charges. Reeves was serving time for murder. Katherine's heart raced. And now Reeves seems to think McKinnon owes him something. The sheriff adjusted his hat. "McKinnon's a good man, Mrs. Anderson. I served with him briefly during the war. Whatever Reeves wants, it ain't justice." Katherine hurried home, her mind churning. Emma was with Mrs. Miller for the afternoon, learning to knit something Katherine was grateful for now. As she approached her house, she saw a familiar figure sitting on her porch steps. "Mr. McKinnon," she said, hurrying forward, "you shouldn't be here. There are men in town looking for you." Yates stood, his expression serious. "I know, saw them ride in from the ridge. That's why I came to warn you and Emma." "Warn us." Yates ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically unsettled. "Reeves is dangerous, Katherine, and he's the type to use innocent people to get what he wants." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and despite the circumstances, Katherine felt a flicker of warmth at the sound of it on his lips. "What does he want from you?" she asked. "6 years ago, I witnessed him murder a rancher in Wyoming. My testimony put him in prison." Yates's blue eyes were troubled. He should still be there, but obviously he's not. "The sheriff knows you," Katherine said. "He told me you're a good man." A ghost of a smile touched Yates's lips. "Dawson and I served together. He knows the truth." He glanced toward town. "I need to face Reeves before anyone gets hurt, but I wanted to make sure you and Emma were safe first." "Emma's with Mrs. Miller," Katherine said. "But you can't just walk in there, they'll kill you." "I've faced worse odds," Yates replied, but his confidence didn't reassure her. "Wait," Katherine said impulsively, placing her hand on his arm. "At least come inside for a moment. Let me give you something to eat before you go." To her surprise, Yates agreed, following her into the modest home. As Katherine busied herself preparing a simple meal, she found herself talking about Thomas, about her fears for Emma, about the whispers that followed them through town. "They think I'm not strong enough," she admitted, setting a plate of bread and preserved meat before him. "That Emma needs a father figure to keep her from turning wild." "You're the strongest woman I've ever met," Yates said quietly. "Raising a child alone in a place like this takes more courage than facing down a gunman." Katherine felt her cheeks warm at the sincerity in his voice. "You've been kind to Emma, the Braid." "She reminds me of my sister," Yates said, then corrected himself. "No, that's not entirely true. She's special in her own right. Smart, observant. She deserves a chance to grow up without fear." "That's all I want for her," Katherine whispered. Yates reached across the table, hesitating before covering her hand with his. "Let me handle Reeves. Then, if you're willing, I'd like to help with Emma and with you, Katherine." The directness of his words startled her. "You barely know us." "I know enough," he replied simply. "I've been alone a long time. When I saw you that first day in town, something told me Thornridge might be more than just another stop along the trail." Before Katherine could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. Yates was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "It's Reeves," he said grimly. "And his men, they must have followed my trail." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest. "There are 3 of them." "Stay inside," Yates instructed, checking his revolver. "Whatever happens, don't come out until it's over." "Yates," Katherine said, surprising herself by catching his arm. "Be careful." He looked down at her, something intense flashing in his eyes. For a moment she thought he might say more or perhaps do more, but instead he nodded once and stepped onto the porch. From the window, Katherine watched as Yates walked calmly to meet the 3 riders who had stopped in front of her home. "Reeves," Yates called, his voice steady. "This is between you and me. Let's keep it that way." The scarred man dismounted, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "McKinnon. Heard you've been playing house with the widow and her brat." Katherine saw Yates's shoulders stiffen, but his voice remained level. "You've got a problem with me. These people have nothing to do with it." "Maybe I want them to have something to do with it," Reeves drawled, his hand hovering near his holster. "Maybe I want you to suffer before you die." "That's not going to happen," Yates replied, and Katherine heard the steel beneath his words. "You're going back to prison, Reeves, or to your grave." "Your choice." Reeves laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet afternoon. Big words for a man facing 3 guns. "He's not alone," came another voice, and Katherine was shocked to see Sheriff Dawson approaching from the side, his deputy beside him. Both had their weapons drawn. "I think you boys should consider riding on." The tension crackled in the air as Reeves assessed the situation. His companions looked nervous, their eyes darting between Yates and the lawman. "This ain't over, McKinnon," Reeves snarled. "It is for today," Dawson said firmly. "Mount up and ride out, or I'll have 3 new residents in my jail, and it ain't comfortable." For a terrible moment, Katherine thought Reeves would draw anyway. Then, with a curse, he swung back onto his horse. "We'll meet again," he promised Yates. "I'll be waiting," Yates replied calmly. As the 3 men rode away, Dawson approached Yates. "They won't go far. I've sent word to the federal marshal in Denver. He should be here within 2 days. Yates nodded his thanks. "I appreciate the help, Dawson. Figured I owed you after Antietam," the sheriff replied. His eyes flicked to the house where Katherine stood watching. "Besides, seems like you might have reason to stay out of trouble these days." After the lawman departed, Yates returned to the house. Katherine hadn't realized she was trembling until he took her hands in his. "It's all right," he said softly. "They're gone for now. But they'll be back," she whispered. "And I'll be ready," he assured her. "Katherine, I want you to take Emma and stay at Mrs. Miller's until the marshal arrives. I'll sleep here to make sure Reeves doesn't get any ideas." The thought of Yates alone in her home should have scandalized her, but instead, Katherine felt only concern for his safety. "What if Reeves comes back tonight?" "Then I'll handle it," Yates said simply. "But he won't risk attacking the sheriff's office, which is where I'll be until dark." Later that evening, after settling Emma at Mrs. Miller's with a story about a special project they were working on, Katherine found herself walking back toward her home in the gathering dusk. She had told herself she was just checking that everything was secure, but in her heart, she knew she was going to see Yates. He was sitting on her porch, rifle across his knees when she approached. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "You should be at Mrs. Miller's," he said, standing quickly. "I know," Katherine replied, climbing the steps to stand before him. "But I needed to thank you for protecting us." Yates shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks." "And for Emma," Katherine continued, finding courage from somewhere deep within. "No one has taken time with her like that since Thomas died. The braid." "It was nothing," Yates insisted, but his eyes told a different story. "In Thornridge it was everything," Katherine said softly. "The men here they call her wild say she needs a firm hand, but you saw her differently." "Because she is different," Yates replied. Like her mother, Katherine felt the warmth of his words wrap around her heart. "I don't know what happens after the marshal comes," she admitted. "If you'll stay or I'll stay," Yates interrupted, his voice certain. "If you want me to." The night air was cool around them, but Katherine felt warmth spreading through her body. "I think I do," she whispered. Yates stepped closer, one hand gently touching her cheek. "I haven't felt at home anywhere since before the war," he confessed. "Until I saw you standing on that boardwalk, chin up despite everything this town throws at you." Katherine leaned into his touch, surprising herself with her boldness. "Emma needs someone who sees her true nature," she said. "And perhaps I do too." When Yates's lips met hers, Katherine felt something that had been tightly coiled within her for 18 months finally begin to unwind. His kiss was gentle but sure, like everything else about him. "You should go back to Mrs. Miller's," he murmured against her hair when they finally parted. For propriety's sake, Katherine nodded, reluctantly stepping back. "Be careful, Yates." "Always," he promised with a smile that warmed her all the way back to Mrs. Miller's home. The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation. Yates spent his days at the sheriff's office and his nights guarding Katherine's home, while she and Emma remained with the kindly widow. The town buzzed with gossip about the standoff and about Catherine's apparent connection to the mysterious cowboy. On the morning of the third day, the federal marshal arrived with 4 deputies. By noon, they had tracked down and apprehended Reeves and his companions without bloodshed, though Reeves had to be carried to jail after unwisely attempting to draw on the marshal. He'll be heading back to Wyoming Territory to serve the rest of his sentence, plus extra for the escape, Marshal Jenkins informed Yates and Katherine as they stood outside the sheriff's office. Plus, seems he's wanted for 2 more killings since his escape. "Thank you, Marshal," Yates said, shaking the man's hand. As the lawmen prepared to depart with their prisoners, Katherine noticed how the townspeople gathered to watch were looking at Yates differently, with respect rather than suspicion. Even more surprising was how they were looking at her and Emma, who stood proudly holding Yates's hand. "Seems like you've made quite an impression, McKinnon," Sheriff Dawson remarked, coming to stand beside them. "Harrison says you're welcome to stay on at the ranch permanently. Says you've got a way with horses he hasn't seen before." "I appreciate that," Yates replied, his eyes meeting Katherine's. "I'm planning to put down roots here." That evening, as the setting sun painted Thornridge's dusty streets with golden light, Yates walked Katherine and Emma home from the general store. Emma skipped ahead, clutching a small bag of candy that Yates had purchased as a celebration. "People were different today," Katherine observed. "Mrs. Parker actually invited Emma to play with her daughter after church on Sunday." Yates smiled. "Sometimes it takes an outsider to make people see what's right in front of them." "And what did you see?" Katherine asked softly. Yates stopped, turning to face her fully. "I saw a woman with more courage than anyone gives her credit for, and a little girl who deserves the chance to be both strong and gentle." He took Katherine's hands in his. "I saw a family I wanted to be part of if you'll have me." Katherine's heart swelled. "It won't be easy." "Thornridge has a long memory." "So do I," Yates replied. "And I remember promising Emma I'd teach her to ride. I keep my promises, Katherine." "I believe you do," she whispered, and when he kissed her again, right there on the main street for all to see, Katherine didn't care about the whispers or stares. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt hope blooming in her heart, bright and unstoppable as the wildflowers that grew on the prairie beyond town. 3 months later, on a crisp January morning, Katherine stood in her bedroom while Mrs. Miller fastened the buttons on her new dress, pale blue, with delicate lace at the collar that Katherine had sewn herself. "You look beautiful, dear," the older woman said, patting Katherine's shoulder. "Thomas would want this for you, you know." Katherine nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "I know." A soft knock at the door heralded Emma's entrance. Her daughter was resplendent in a new dress of her own, her golden hair arranged in an intricate braid adorned with tiny white flowers. "Mama, you look like an angel," Emma declared, rushing forward to hug her. "Mr. Yates, I mean Papa is waiting at the church, and he looks so handsome." Katherine smiled at her daughter's easy adoption of the new title for Yates. In the months since Reeves's capture, Yates had courted her properly, joining them for Sunday dinners and teaching Emma to ride the gentle mare he'd trained especially for her. He'd built additions onto Katherine's small house, including a proper workshop where she could expand her sewing business beyond mending. Most importantly, he'd shown the town of Thornridge that the widow Anderson and her daughter weren't figures to be pitied or criticized, but treasured. The change in the townspeople had been gradual but unmistakable. Emma now attended school, where she was thriving under the tutelage of the young schoolteacher, Miss Collins. Katherine had been invited to join the Ladies' Aid Society, and her sewing skills were suddenly in demand for more than just mending. "Time to go, dear," Mrs. Miller announced, breaking into Katherine's thoughts. Can't keep that handsome cowboy waiting." The small church was filled to capacity, something Katherine had not expected when she and Yates had planned their simple wedding. Even Mr. Harrison had closed the ranch for the day so his workers could attend. As Katherine walked down the aisle on Sheriff Dawson's arm, her eyes found Yates standing tall and proud at the altar, his face illuminated with joy when he saw her. Beside him stood Emma, practically bouncing with excitement. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" Reverend Phillips asked when they reached the altar. "Her daughter and I do," Dawson replied with a wink at Emma, who beamed. As Katherine took her place beside Yates, he leaned close to whisper, "You're more beautiful than sunrise on the prairie." "And you," she whispered back, "are the kindest man I've ever known." When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation startled Katherine with its enthusiasm. As Yates kissed her, she heard Emma's delighted giggle and felt the little girl's arms wrap around them both. Later, at the celebration held at the newly expanded Anderson home, soon to be the McKinnon home, Katherine found a moment of quiet on the porch. Inside, music and laughter flowed as freely as the punch Mrs. Baker had insisted on providing. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. McKinnon," Yates said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Katherine replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "A year ago, I was the widow everyone pitied, and Emma was the child they said was too wild for her own good." Yates slipped an arm around her waist. "And now Emma has the run of the town, with every shopkeeper giving her candy and asking about her riding lessons," Katherine laughed. "And I'm married to the man who changed everything by simply braiding a little girl's hair." "It wasn't just the braid," Yates said, his voice growing serious. "It was you, Katherine. Your strength gave me a reason to stop wandering." From inside came the sound of Emma's laughter as she danced with Judge Parker's son, her braided hair flying. "You think she'll be all right?" Katherine asked softly. "Growing up here." Yates turned Katherine to face him, his blue eyes steady and sure. "I think she'll be extraordinary," he said. "Just like her mother." As the winter sun set over Thornridge, painting the harsh landscape in soft gold and rose, Katherine leaned into her husband's embrace. The town that had once seemed too harsh for her daughter now felt like the perfect place to build their future, a future as full of promise as the untamed land around them.